From the earliest days of the church, right up until the present time, there have been teachers who have misled their congregations. The Apostle Paul calls them false teachers. And today, on Truth for Life, Alistair Begg continues our series in Titus called Get It Right, with a list of telling characteristics pointing out the telltale signs of deceptive leaders. We'll learn what to watch out for with Alistair Begg's message titled False Teachers.
We are studying Titus under the heading Get It Right, and we have looked together at the importance of leadership in the church, and we look tonight at a section in which Paul addresses the issue of false teachers. There is a very real sense in which, irrespective of the age or context in which false teachers arise, they always fit this kind of identikit picture. I am growing increasingly fond of the Apostle Paul as I study 1 Corinthians and Titus. One of the things that is such an encouragement to me is just how straightforward he is about everything. It seems that there's not a subject that he won't tackle, there's not an issue that he won't face. He does so with great clarity and also with conviction, and not least of all when he comes to address what was a specific concern in the context of Crete, where Titus was ministering. The absolute necessity of spiritual elders in the church, to which he's given time in verses 5 through 9, is confirmed for us insofar as he reminds the readers that the need for these elders in the church is twofold. These men need to be firmly and truly committed to the Scriptures, so that in exercising their leadership, they may, according to the end of verse 9, encourage others by sound doctrine, that is the positive side of things, and they may also refute those who oppose sound doctrine. And just in case any amongst the readership of that letter, when it first arrived to them, and certainly Titus would have shared it with a wider group, presumably, just in case anybody was in any doubt about there being any heretics present amongst them, Paul immediately establishes the facts. And what he provides for us here in these verses is a great long list of characteristics of these false teachers. I want to try and summarize them in the quest for time under 7 headings. First of all, in relation to these false teachers, they are numerically strong. Notice verse 10a, for there are many rebellious people. We're not talking here about a small trickling of individuals. We're talking about a quantity of folks. These individuals are numerically strong, and their whole purpose, when you take the verses in total, is to seek to persuade new converts that the simple story of the cross of Jesus Christ needs to be supplemented. And in the specific case of these folks, needs to be supplemented by Jewish genealogies and by various rules and regulations. We need always to read Titus in concurrence with the other 2 pastoral epistles, 1 and 2 Timothy. And in 1 Timothy chapter 1, these individuals are referred to in writing to Timothy. As I urge you, he says, verse 3 of chapter 1 of 1 Timothy, when I went into Macedonia, stay there in Ephesus, so that you may command certain men not to teach false doctrines any longer, nor to devote themselves to myths and endless genealogies. The reason being that these promote controversies rather than God's work. And then he says in verse 6, some have wandered away from these, from the command of love and a good conscience and a sincere faith. Some have wandered away from these and turned to meaningless talk. They want to be teachers of the law, but they do not know what they're talking about or what they so confidently affirm. There are plenty of people who would love to teach and shouldn't teach because they don't know what they're talking about. And of course, those who would teach when they don't know what they're talking about will only cause unbelievable havoc amongst those who are their pupils. And so, we recognize, first of all, that these individuals are numerically strong. Secondly, their motives are wrong. In verse 11, we're told that they were driven by mercenary considerations for the sake of dishonest gain. They were full of talk, they were full of deceit, they were full of Jewish notions, and they were full of a desire for cash. And one doesn't need to launch very far around us to see how easy it is for this desire for mercenary advance to suddenly dull the edge of the proclamation of the cross. And there are many in our day who, in the cause of evangelism on television, certainly appear to fit rather closely to this description. They are numerically strong, their motives are wrong. Thirdly, their message is off. They are opposed to the sound doctrine that he has mentioned in verse 9. And instead of proclaiming sound doctrine, they are committed to fanciful stories, all kinds of Jewish genealogies, and man-made commands. And the things that they sought to press upon other people were actually just made up. And made up, he says here, by men who have turned their backs on the truth. You will find that in verse 14. Individuals who, in a quest to bamboozle people and tie them up in knots, have themselves turned their backs on the truth. And in every generation and in every false teaching context, you will discover that this is actually the case. Their message will sound virtually right. It will be very, very difficult to put your finger on what is actually wrong. And that is the trick of the evil one. To use terminology, to embrace concepts that sound as if they are within the orb of sound doctrine, while in actual fact drawing people away from the essentials of the faith. The message they proclaim is off, and also their character is dreadful. In verse 10, we're told that they are rebellious. The word there is insubordinate or undisciplined. They're like disloyal soldiers who refuse the officer's commands. The officer being Jesus, and the marching orders being the Scriptures. And these heretics, says Paul, are rebellious. And it is interesting that people who in themselves are so rebellious to the truth of Scripture should demand from their followers almost a slavish obedience to what they propound. Not only are they rebellious, but they are empty talkers or mere talkers, verse 10. They have a worship that is not matched by their walk. They are fond of speculation, and they are not so fond of application. And the point that is being made there is simply that their verbiage does not find a match-up in their character and in their lives. Rebellious people, talkers, and deceivers. Instead of leading people into the truth, they lead people away from the truth. And it is not that they actually deny God. In verse 16, we're told they claim to know God. The greatest danger that comes to us is from people who claim to know God. It is not that the Book of Mormon has dealt a death blow to the Scriptures. It's just that it supplements the Scriptures. It is not that the Jehovah's Witnesses do not name the name of God. It is simply that they deny deity to the second person of the Trinity, namely Jesus Christ. The people are deceivers. They themselves are deceived, and therefore can do nothing other than deceive those who come under the orb of their influence. And the reason that Paul is addressing this is because their impact is so incredibly powerful. Now, just in case anybody thinks that what he is doing here is entering into some kind of racial slur, he points out that even from amongst their own ethnic background, verse 12, their own prophets have said about them that Cretans are always liars, evil brutes, and lazy gluttons. In the same way that Scotsmen are mean, apparently, Cretans were greedy and foolish and bad. And the word lazy belly, which is a literal translation of the Greek, is simply that they were so unbelievably greedy. And they not only gobbled up food, but they gobbled up ideas, and so they were suckers for those who came with their false teaching. Many Jewish people in Crete, and in addition to their being influenced by unbelieving Jews, it would appear that they had absorbed the worst character traits of their non-Jewish countrymen. All right? So, to summarize quickly, they are numerically strong, their motives are wrong, their message is off, their character is dreadful, and they are destructively active. Verse 11, they are ruining whole households. Their teaching was fundamentally upsetting. It was not the kind of thing that put people on their feet. It was the kind of thing that turned people on their heads. And it was having an ill effect on family life. Let it be said, and let it be said firmly and forcibly, that genuine Christian teaching unifies families. Yes, we know that Christ came to bring a sword, to bring division. And so we understand that when a person embraces faith in Jesus Christ, that may put them at odds with their non-Christian family members. That is not to which we're referring. What I'm saying is that when the message of Christ comes to embrace a family, it unifies a family. It turns the hearts of the parents to the children and the children to their parents. It brings harmony. It brings hope. It does not bring destruction nor despair. And false teachers will always bring destruction in their wake. Sixthly, they are corrupt in their minds and in their consciences. That's the end of verse 15. At the heart of verse 15 is the instruction of Jesus. He said it a number of times. If you want an actual cross-reference, it's recorded for us in Matthew 15:11, although it's not the only place, where Jesus pointed out to the Pharisees that the problem was not in things hitting people from the outside, but it was in bad people who from their insides were causing the problem externally. Jesus called the crowd to him and said, listen and understand, what goes into a man's mouth doesn't make him unclean, but what comes out of his mouth, that's what makes him unclean. And that's what Paul is reinforcing here. To the pure, he says, all things are pure. But to those who are corrupted, who do not believe, nothing is pure. In fact, he says both their minds and their consciences are corrupted. The real seat of purity is the conscience. And when defilement enters there, then the mind and the life goes right along with it. It was true in